DCSL. I'd like to welcome you all to our 5th webinar series. We're very excited about this particular topic, and we hope that you will enjoy the session. To speak on the topic, SMEs and startups thriving in the new normal, we have put together a very distinguished panel, 2 distinguished gentlemen who are experts in their own field, who will be speaking to the 2 aspects that this topic hopes to cover. The objective of the seminar is to, we hope that we will be able to provide some insight on how SMEs and startups can leverage digitalization in the face of our new realities, tackle short-term and long-term funding challenges, and access capital beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. And very interestingly, we have no one other than Ms. Aramide Abe, who will be speaking, or who will be moderating the session. I do not believe that there's anyone more suited to moderate a session that focuses on SMEs and startups other than Aramide. But before I introduce us and welcome the moderator and hand over the discussions to her, I'd like to very quickly formally introduce our panel for today's discussion. I'd like to introduce Mr. Austin Okere. Mr. Austin Okere, I'm sure quite a number of us who are currently on the webinar are very familiar with him. Mr. Austin Okere is the founder of CWG PLC and the Also Leadership Academy, which mentors businesses and entrepreneurs for geometric growth. Austin has an MBA from the Yesser Business School and is an entrepreneur in residence at the Columbia Business School, New York. He was appointed to the advisory board of the Global Business School Network in Washington, DC, in recognition of his major contribution to the development of business education and knowledge transfer in Africa. Mr. Austin is a consultant to the Sustainable Development Goals Africa Center in Kigali. He is a member of several boards across Nigeria and Africa, and has been recognized with a Lifetime Entrepreneurship Achievement by the American University of Nigeria. I'd like to leave it at that. I'll put up during the course of the session, where time permits, his profile, so we can all then look at that. So I would like to very warmly welcome Mr. Austin Okere. Thank you very much, sir, for being here today.
My pleasure.
I would like to then quickly now introduce our second panelist, Mr. Mezu Nguneli. Mr. Mezu Nguneli is the managing partner of Sahel Capital. He has a 20-year career in a broad spectrum of finance-related roles in private equity, investment banking, and corporate finance. Over the past 7 years, Mezu has worked extensively within the agribusiness sector in West Africa and across a broad range of crop value chains. He holds a master's in business administration from Harvard Business School and received a BSc in industrial management with a minor in information systems from the Carnegie Mellon University. He's also a 2007 Archbishop Desmond Tutu Fellow and a 2015 Eisenhower Fellow. Thank you very much, Mr. Mezu. We welcome you today. Thank you for honoring our invitation.
Thank you.
I'd like to then very quickly move on to our moderator. Before I hand over the proceedings of today to her, I'd like to formally introduce Ms. Aramide Abe, who is the founder of Niger Startups. As I mentioned earlier, there's no one better suited to moderate a discussion on SMEs and startups than Aramide. Aramide is on a mission to influence private sector policies in Africa and to build the African startup ecosystem through her entrepreneurial platform, Niger Startups, a virtual 90,000 member sector agnostic hub for small to medium-sized businesses. Like I said earlier, I'll be putting up the profiles of our facilitators, panelists and moderators as we go through the discussion. But I'd like to very warmly welcome Aramide Abe and hand over the discussions now. Thank you very much, Aramide, and over to you now.
Thank you, Anne. Good afternoon, everyone. My amazing panel and all the guests today, good afternoon. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you, DCSL, for this opportunity. Before I kick off, I'd like to just share my screen if that's okay, just to share the agenda and then come back out. So let me just do that. Okay. So we've done intro, so it's fine. So in terms of the flow of this panel today, we've done introductions, which is good, thank you, and that was a great start. We're going to do a bit of an icebreaker, which is to ask a few questions via a poll. So I'm going to launch the poll in a few minutes, and then I will go into some context setting just to set the pace and the tone for the discussion of today, after which we'll get a few perspectives from the panelists, and then we'll go into some questions. So I'll be asking some questions, and then we'll move on to questions from the audience, and then we'll wrap up. We have about an hour and a half for this, so we'll try to fit everything in good time. And I think maybe Anne mentioned already that if there are questions, the members of the audience can put these in the Q&A box so that it's easy to navigate, and then highlight your questions for asking during the Q&A. Okay, so I'm going to come out of that and then just launch the poll. Okay, so this poll speaks to the theme of today's panel. And it's really just trying to understand, of course, hopefully there are quite a number of SMEs on this call, but it's trying to understand where you are and really what the impact has been of the COVID-19 pandemic on your businesses. So I'm just going to launch that now. There's 3 questions in total. Take your time and yeah, please answer all of them, and then we can then start looking through the questions coming in, the answers coming in rather. So I'm just trying to launch the poll. Can we get that enabled for me to launch it? Fantastic, thank you. Okay, so we've got 3 questions. I hope everyone can see it. If you can't, please just leave a comment in the chat box. The first question, and of course the panelists can answer as well. The first question is, what is the level of impact of COVID-19 on your business? So high, if you think COVID might put you out of business or it already has. Medium, if it's significantly impacting your financial performance. And then low, if it may impact you, but you're confident you can weather the storm. So I'd like to see the answers to this. We're seeing some of the answers come in. Now I'll go through the second question while you go through as well. The second question says, what is the most significant financial challenge your company has faced since the outbreak of the pandemic? And that's staff wages, rent, repayment of loans, other expenses. Some may not even have any specific financial challenge, which is great. And then the third question, how do you plan to address cash flow constraints? Would it be loans from commercial banks, loans from microfinance banks, negotiating moratoriums with lenders, reducing your operating costs, or no cash flow constraints? So give it a few more minutes just so that we can get at least 60% of the audience, or maybe 70% voting. So far, we have 52% who have voted. Give it 30 more seconds, maybe. So out of 84 attendees, 50 have voted. It would be great to see some of the answers, actually. Okay, we're almost there. Okay, so I'm going to just end the poll now and just look at the questions, or the answers rather. and then share results. Okay, so I'm hoping everyone can see the results. The level of impact on COVID-19, I'd say, so out of the number of people who voted, 75%, about under 75%, under 75% see it as not highly impacting their businesses, which is a bit, on the positive side, of course. So it means that it's either medium or low. Now, a good 64% say it's going to significantly impact their financial performance, without a doubt. And then about 24% say this may impact them financially, but they're confident that they can weather the storm. So thank you for that feedback. The second question talks about the most significant financial challenge the company has faced. And 35% say staff wages. Because you can understand, are you paying salaries, without having any earnings or revenue coming in, so that's a major concern for businesses, as we can see. 5% say rent, 16% say repayment of loans, and then another 33% actually say other expenses. So it'll be interesting to see what those other expenses are. And then 11% say there's no specific financial challenge. And then number 3, how do you plan to address cash flow constraints? 58%, I'll start from the highest, say they plan to reduce operating costs. 15% say they'll negotiate moratoriums with lenders. 13% say they're going to go for loans from commercial banks. 7% of the audience say loans from microfinance banks, and then another 7% have no cash flow constraints. So thank you for that feedback. And I'll now go into the presentation. Okay. So, I'm sure many people have seen, know the World Health Organization COVID dashboard and tracker. This just gives some insight as to what's currently happening today, and there's a few dashboards, but I went to the WHO just to get a sense of, okay, so globally, this is where we are. Very different from what the tracker or the dashboard looked like even in March, right? It's almost like the numbers just keep growing exponentially. But then we'll go into Nigeria. And as at today, and I checked on Twitter just before this session, the number of confirmed cases is 6,677. What I'm trying to bring out is, of course, we know what is at play here, but it would be, it makes sense to just talk about the elephant in the room before we now talk about the economy and productivity and all of that. So I thought to bring out some statistics as at today. And this is just, of course, confirmed cases, known cases that have been registered and recorded. But then that brings me to the impact of that on productivity and employment. There is a looming challenge with productivity and employment. Traditional ways of doing business are clearly changing. I know we're all very digitally savvy, so we've been getting all the news updates. The likes of Google and Twitter have allowed their staff to work from home, either till the end of the year or even forever. And yesterday, there was an article that came out that said Cambridge University, for one, was one of the universities who has postponed lectures up until the summer of next year. So that just shows you the impact in terms of at least productivity. And of course, that also impacts employment as well, just looking at some of the statistics that were just shared through the poll. And then, when you think about it, corporates are initiating this return to work agenda and exploring ways as to how people can begin to work more remotely. And it's not limited to the West or, the West alone. Even in Nigeria, there are international corporates and local corporates and small businesses reviewing the working style and working situations in their organizations. And that, brings me to just the knock-on effect of those who depend on rental income. So the co-working spaces, for one. I was reading somewhere where WeWork was facing, a drastic drop in terms of their numbers from January, or their share, to now. And so COVID-19 has brought on a lot of restrictions, but it's going to make the world more global, presenting opportunities for Africans to harness and access. And so that, for example, an individual can actually now get a job in Norway because they can work virtually, or Dubai, and that doesn't restrict an African. So we're not thinking about immigration and all those things that were obstacles to accessing, jobs internationally. So while there are the downsides, these are some of the things that one can look at and consider. And I think I'll just stop there because it's more about our panelists today. So I'm going to hand over to Austin. He has graciously allowed for me to refer to him as Austin today, Mr. Okere, Austin, and just to give some reactions with regards to the current state of events, COVID-19 and business.
Thank you, Aramide, and welcome to our guest. From where I stand, the situation as it is, I can liken it to a train that is moving, and you have actually one of three choices. Stand in front of it, and it will crush you. Remain on the tracks, and you will be left behind. Get on, and you will go for the ride. We all initially were like rabbits caught in the headlamps of a car. Everybody froze, and everybody thought, okay, let me just wait. After 2 weeks or a month, this thing will go away, and then I will go back to life as normal. In fact, some precedents, the one said by Easter it to be gone. But that is not being the case. So we had the impact. And as with every impact, there is a response. The issue is that between impact and response, there's a whole spectrum of what you can do to adapt. You can merely survive, as some companies say, well, I'll just leave it and then come back and pick it up. I think those companies probably will find that there's nothing to pick up because nobody knows when this is going to end. There are some that say, well, I'll just keep my door marginally ajar, like open, not open. And, when business comes to usual, then we can open. And unfortunately, there again, there's not much comfort because there's no room for differentiation. Many people are doing that anyway. So it will be a crowded park, if at all. If you can imagine that you close ShopRite, you open it after 3 months and all the people trying to rush in. And there's some that are taking advantage of the situation to leverage into an area of thriving, an area of leading their industry by doing out-of-the-box thinking. I'll give you an example. We had all felt sorry, in a way, happy that the nuisance was away, but felt sorry for people that were doing Okada business or motorcycle business, carrying passengers. If I give you the figures today, you'll be amazed. Many of them pivoted to logistics, and they are moving about 2 million packages in Lagos alone, in my understanding, per day, at about 2,000 naira per package. And if you put the sums together, that's a neat and tidy 45 billion naira. And at the end of the day, if you put it together in a year, they are on a roll. You say that that is because they found a niche. What about those that are into other areas that were traditionally face-to-face? So I'll give you an example of another friend, a lady who was renting out mobile toilets to event centers. And there are no events, so what? All her toilets were parked in a compound. But she thought outside the box, approached the CDC, and rented her toilets out to them for the temporary hospitals. And there she's in big business. So there is a space for everybody. If you want to just close the door and wait, there's a space for you. If you want to keep the door ajar and and wait until it seems safe, there's also a space for you. But I think the people that are on this call are probably the ones that are looking at what out of the box idea, game-changing idea can I implement to leverage this level playing field to push me ahead into the leader in my industry. And I think that's the mindset we should all go with. If you look at Zoom, 4 months ago, nobody knew who Zoom was. But they did leverage, and today they're way ahead of, in my view, Microsoft Teams or Skype or WhatsApp. And if you look at Amazon, it's been the same. Sometimes the Chinese use the same expression for challenge and opportunity. This is a deep challenge, but it's also a big opportunity. Depends on how you see it, whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, or you see the glass as half full or half empty. Let me bring it home and talk about my two companies. So there are those that think there will be net losers in this scheme, and there are those that think there will be net gainers. So net gainers will be like Zoom, net losers will be like Arik or British Airways, and there's a whole spectrum. And those that are resilient, like many of the banks are resilient, neither here nor there, but they are standing. And what we need to do is to decide how we can go from one rung to CWG, which is my technology company, it's actually positioned himself into a net beneficiary, because at the end of the day, they stayed and opened their door wide and leveraged. And because other people either fully shut or partially shut, the customers still need services. And therefore they go to who has the services, and their business is booming. If you look at the Also Leadership Academy, we had a place in Lekki. Mezo has been there actually, and we were impacting people in Lekki. But nobody can come to Lekki now, even if you wanted to. We quickly moved all our curriculum on virtual, and today we're reaching audiences in places never thought about. Northern of the country, outside the country. We've had 400 people receive impact from us from international. So that is a net beneficiary. I think you can think about a game-changing idea rather than wallow in self-pity, and that's my thinking.
Thank you, Austin, for that. I was making my notes, and you mentioned out of the box thinking, that mindset of disruption, leveraging it like what the likes of Zooms did, and digitizing. So very quickly switching to virtual, which is what you have done, and that's really impressive. Thank you. So I'll switch over to Mezo as well to give us some of his own perspectives.
Thanks, Saramide. So a couple of different thoughts. I think at the onset in March, when it became clear that this was going to potentially severely impact Nigeria as well, we had to move very quickly to put in place various contingency measures. And to give some context, we have 8 different companies around Nigeria. We have a dairy company in Kano. We have a rice milling operation in Anambra. We have a cassava starch in Kogi. We have poultry, edible oils in Kwara. We have other operations in Oyo and Ogun State. So pretty spread out across the country, and we're usually on the road quite a bit. And we had to think very quickly about implications for these companies. How do we potentially mitigate risks? And how do we take into account different things as we were going into a potential lockdown and dealing with all the issues that all of us and different companies are dealing with? And so we put the usual safety measures in place that everybody talks about at the different companies. In many cases, we also had to reduce production because we split teams into 2 to decongest factories and also to reduce risk that one team could contaminate the other and shut down entire operations. We had to put in place remote work tools for those who could work remotely. We had to think about security. And thankfully for us, all our companies are deemed essential services because of the food and agriculture space, which was helpful. At the same time, even though they're deemed essential services, moving product from Kano to Lagos or from Anambra to Abuja through different state borders. I never thought of states having borders in the past, but given different states' restrictions, is much harder to move finished products and raw material across different states and making sure that that works. So I think March and a big chunk of April, we were dealing with a lot of those issues. And then after that, and even more recently, I think there are a number of things we're dealing with that I'm sure many business owners in this webinar are dealing with, ranging from supply chain. How do you get the raw materials that you need to ensure your factory operates? And for those that are operating and getting raw materials, costs have also gone up. So rice paddy for a rice mill has gone up significantly. Cassava tuber prices have gone up, and anybody importing any raw material has seen big price spikes because of currency. So dealing and mitigating these issues has been a challenge. HR is also important, and I'm not thinking about HR from just paying salaries. How do you motivate your team when everybody is afraid and worried about themselves, their families, what could have impact? And how do you also ensure that you have measures in place to protect them as well while they work? And incentives around that. So a lot of issues that we've had to deal with around this. And then innovation has also been one. And Austin touched on it a little bit earlier, is how do you change what you do such to still ensure that you're in business and you're meeting the needs of customers. And I'll give one example, which one of our companies did recently. A poultry company in Kwara selling very basic products, broiler meat, and selling to farm gate to distributors who then delivered onwards to customers. And the last one month, they've moved online with an online portal to sell poultry meat, and then with delivery being met by the distributors for free. So a sales channel which didn't exist before, but now exists to help drive and pull sales. And we've seen Spar do that. Spar has gone online, and they weren't doing that before. So people have tried to pivot and modify how they've operated just to ensure that they can survive during this time. And I think I'll just make one more comment, which is that during this time, it's very easy, no matter what sector you're in, to get burdened by the challenge you face as a business owner, because there are quite a few challenges going on. But I think the key message I'll put out there is that regardless of those challenges, you should, along the lines of what Austin said, use this as an opportunity to pivot, and look for those opportunities that you can capitalize on. And you need to focus on being resilient. It's a tough time, but that mental fortitude and resilience is key to get through this time, and ensure that when it does pass, because it will, that you are still standing and in business, which is very critical.
Thank you, Mezo, for that. And I'll just recap from my notes again. Just talking through some of the things you did. So putting safety measures in place, considering raw material sourcing was one thing you highlighted there, especially where there are price hikes vis-a-vis, produce and food. And then from an HR standpoint, you mentioned motivating your team during a crisis, or, just ways to do that, incentives, protective measures, remote working tools, introducing them. And then something very interesting, which is, speaks more to what we do when it comes to innovation. This introduction of new sales channels that didn't exist before, but because of the current crisis, it almost, pushed, those organizations into quickly thinking through how to continue to meet the demand. So that was great, thank you. And then finally, you mentioned, focusing on being resilient, using the opportunity to pivot, which is what Austin had also mentioned. So thank you for the reactions, and I'll now go into some of my questions. I have a few questions before we take questions from the audience. I have some questions for Mr. Okere, for Austin on digitalization, and for Mezo on finance and capital. So Mr. Okere, I'm going to ask, as a business owner, Austin, as a business owner, how do I pursue differentiation or cost leadership to increase my market share and returns? And that's for Austin.
All right, so first and foremost, I will be remiss if I don't address the audience. This is the SMEs and Startup. And I think let me address them. I'll come to your question. There is always the thing about the elevator elevator pitch, which is that you didn't expect it, but here you are and you find yourself in the same elevator with Mezu, whom you're trying to get business or money from. And because you have not pre-planned anything, you are tongue-tied and the thing is moving from 15th floor to ground floor. Any time from now, it's going to get to ground floor. So there are two ways that you are going to be pitching. You are going to probably say, oh, I'm a startup and an SME. Our prices are not high. Please give me an opportunity. We will not disappoint you, which is quite blasé. If I were a startup and SME, I wouldn't as a startup and SME. In that elevator, I'm going to tell Mezu that I am an agile enterprise, which is actually what you are as a startup, because a startup like a speedboat, a fully built and mature business like a ship. It needs a whole mile to turn 1 degree. But the agility of the startup is they can pivot and they can go into new areas and be creative very quickly. So I'm going to tell Mezu, I am an agile enterprise, and what I offer is focused partnership. Well, I mean, a startup, how many customers do you want? Do you have anyway? So you're going to give the best to the customer. And what I will deliver is an innovative idea that can move you ahead of your industry. That's how I describe myself. I'll describe myself as an agile industry that's going to offer you focused partnership, and I'm going to give you a very innovative idea that's going to move you at the top of your industry. That's how I'm going to get his attention. The rest is up to whether I have three things. I have a true authentic product to offer that is better than what is there or at a better price, in which case you have a better, superior value proposition. Something is going to make his company more money, saving money or saving time. So if you are any of these, don't waste your time trying to be beggarly, because people are really not impressed by that. Take the people that are doing well now. They call them fashion designers. When I was growing up, we called them tailors and seamstresses. And they will approach you and tell you they'll make a dress for you or for your children. Now, the new crop of people, they are fashion designers, and they will tell you that they will dress you up to look smart and feel confident so that you will deliver with confidence and be effective. So look at those nuances. But if you ask me the question, what is the competitive strategy I will adapt? In my view, there are four. I've written a paper about that, 4 competitive strategies that I see. First is technology leadership. So you see people like Apple and Samsung, they're always at the cutting edge of technology. iOS is about iOS 10 or 11 now, I don't even know. But it's difficult to keep up with them because that's the strategy that they've taken to differentiate themselves, technology leadership. Now, if you are not in charge of making the technology, like our company CWG, what we focus on is the second method of differentiation and therefore competition. And that second method is service excellence. So if I take a product from Oracle, for instance, or Microsoft, and add value to it. So I'll give a definite example. About 65% of the banks in Nigeria use a product called Finacle, which we are the sole providers of that solution here in Nigeria for. Finacle is just a program, a core banking program. But that's not what we offer. What we add is deep service excellence, that we are the best at customizing it to meet the environment requirements, including CBN reporting and what have you. And we don't rely on our foreign partners to do any implementation. We've invested to be able to do it ourselves. And therefore, in this COVID where people are not able to travel, those companies that are depending on foreign people to come and do their technology, they are stuck. And that's why we have that uptrust. Because we took that decision long ago that we're not going to cut corners on costs. So we were ensuring that we're getting 40% of the revenue, because that's what I need to invest in technology and in capability. And some people were happy to just take 10%. I mean, that's just your withholding tax. So service excellence is extremely important as a competitive strategy if you cannot lead on the technology side. But there is also another one which startups can leverage. So I don't want to call you startup, I'll call you agile enterprises. There's another one which agile enterprises can leverage, and that's called customer intimacy. So as an agile enterprise, I don't have 50 customers, but I can start with DCSL and make sure that I know what they need even before they ask for it. And that's customer intimacy. So if I take it out of technology and take it to someone who sells groceries in an estate, for instance, and he's delivering things from door to door, does your shopping for you because maybe the man and the woman are working. And as you arrive, he knows when each of them approximately arrive. So 6 o'clock, yours is delivered. That one comes at 9, yours is delivered. And the lady is pregnant, heavily pregnant. A pregnant lady with a first child, what does she know? But she notices the shopper. And then she comes and says, well, I bought Pampers just in case, or I brought baby milk just in case. You know, so she knows you and she knows what you probably need that you have not thought about, you know. And the last one is cost leadership, which is typically used by the Chinese. Whatever your price that's cheaper than cheap, and you can get a cheap one from China. I'm not a big fan of cost leadership because I believe it's better to talk about value. Cost is what you pay, value is what you get. And each time we go to offer our services, we over-focus on cost instead of making it clear the value we're providing. And if I can see the value, then cost becomes secondary. So these are the areas in which you can differentiate. You can choose any of them or a combination of any. But I guarantee you that if you're very focused on the one that you choose, deliberately honing it, you can differentiate very easily on that.
Thank you, Austin. I feel like I've just sat through a class that that is going to benefit me for a long time. But thank you for that. From thinking about ourselves as agile enterprises to, either leading on the tech front or the service excellence front, and then a new term that I've learned today, customer intimacy, and then of course the final one, cost leadership. These are really, really valid points for the SMEs, like myself and all the other ones on here. And it's interesting how you started with the talk about an SME meeting a Mezzo in the elevator and them introducing themselves to him. And I was going to ask my next question, ask him my second question, because it's about SME definition. So for someone being in private equity and having to deal with, the European definition of SMEs, I think we might want to sort of now ask you, how do we define SMEs locally? Because the definition of SMEs gets varied. And so maybe you just want to shed some more light on that, please, Mezwo.
Sure. So I think generally within Nigeria, when people think of SMEs, they tend to think of companies that have less than 100 million naira in revenue. So maybe 40 million, 50 million, 60 million naira revenue, and less than 300 employees. Now, internationally, the employee definition is roughly the same. So in the EU, it's roughly under 250 employees. In the US or the IFC is roughly under 300 employees. But where and there's actually similarities with the micro and medium definition overseas with SME definition in Nigeria. I think the difference is the medium-sized or larger SMEs in Europe or the US tend to be much larger than what people think of when they think of SMEs. So they go up to $50 million type revenues being defined as SME. But I think for the Nigerian context, people generally think under 100 million naira as an SME.
Thank you for that. Gives me lots of clarification. There's just so many definitions, and we're all throwing the word SME, MSME up and down. So I'm happy you gave that clarity, which is less than 100 million naira in revenue if you're an SME in Nigeria, and fewer than 300 employees, which is pretty much best practice. So thank you. Okay, so Ms. Austin, I'm going to ask how SMEs can use digitalization to transform their businesses.
I think at the end of the day, they're saying that a crisis should not be wasted. I think this is a very good example of it. And I've already talked about Zoom, which was an agile enterprise. And it's already, if you put the valuation of Zoom today at 48 billion or so, all the major airlines are about 46 billion. This is just what you call a startup or SME, or call it a, whatever you want. But to put it in context, AIG, which is the parent of British Airways, is about 3.4 billion. So Zoom today in valuation is more than 10 times the value of the parent of British Airways. Digitization, I think, immediately gives you 25% advantage over non-digitized companies. Let me use a simple example. So you have a company that finds itself in this pandemic, not planned, but there's a lockdown. And they have nice filing cabinets. All the information is there in the office. However, you can't move. And you need a customer file to serve a customer. Even if it's a hospital, they'll go to that place and bring that blue file and they'll serve you. Now look at another hospital which has put all their files online and any of their doctors anywhere can access those files. At least you could do teleconsulting and you can always deliver through logistics companies. But the point is that if you don't have that information sitting somewhere where it can be accessed by those who need it, constantly updated, it's very difficult to call yourself online. And the reason why I say a crisis such as this should not be wasted is that we were all scared of going away from face to face. So we all drive somewhere in the morning and then we drive back in the evening, waste 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening. But with this pandemic, many people who are not even planned to have remote working as part of their strategy have keyed into it and have now managed to start offering some element of options to their staff. Now, the big beauty of it is that whereas in the past, we go to an office to clock in and get salary, today, many of us will have to learn how to be paid on output. So a lot of the consulting I do, the first thing I ask them about what is your hopes and what is your fears. And many staff will say, oh, well, my fear is I may have a job at the end of the pandemic. And it's true, they may not. But guess what? You have a system, you have internet, and you have your brain. Do not be afraid of what is coming. Just prepare yourself, because it's only when opportunity meets preparation that you have success. And you begin to see beyond your mind's eye into thinking outside the box. The same company that you are drawing the salary from, you can offer your service to them and charge them as well as to other companies. So I did a paper on using the CowP method to analyze the future of work. And what I came about was that the millennials coming into the workforce were more attuned to remote working. In the UK, they'll sit in Starbucks and they'll deliver their work and they'll get paid probably more than those that were working full time. And they had the control of their time because all their files were digital and they could deliver to you wherever they're sitting. And the custodians, which are those of us that go to an office and clock in, we have to go to that place called an office to be effective. So you see already the millennials were at an advantage. And as this has happened, the advantage has even increased in terms of those that are included and those that are left behind. So my son is there in the other room doing his schooling online because he goes to a school where they quickly move the curriculum online and they're teaching them. But I feel sorry that some other schools have not been able to do that, and therefore they are not able to continue to teach the children. So instead of the divide being poor, it's or the haves and the haves not, it's now the included and the left behind. And in the center of it is this whole ability to digitize, offer your services digitally, or take service digitally.
Thank you for that, and it just gives a lot of insight. First of all, the fact that it is possible to transform your business digitally, because we can see businesses that are already doing that, and the opportunities that there are when it comes to digital, because with that, you can quickly become more competitive and latch onto opportunities. And then that brings me to a question that I have for Mesro. Thinking about a company now embracing digital and playing in the more competitive space, would that be an attractive company to a Mesro, for example, and his organization? Or what kind of indices will make a company attractive to you in the new post-COVID era? Maybe one that has adjusted its business model to become more competitive, say with digital.
Sure, and actually, before I answer, there was a slight power fluctuation here, so my internet connectivity faded out for a few seconds. So I only heard the last few words. So if you don't mind just quickly recapping the question, just make sure I heard everything.
No, that's fine, that's fine. I said, what kind of indices will make a company attractive to you in the new post-COVID era? Would it be one that has adjusted its business model to embrace this new digital way of doing things? Being that you see a lot of companies, perhaps maybe on the more medium-sized scale, but what kind of companies for the purposes of those who are on the call today?
Sure. So, and as I answer that, I want to go to an earlier comment that Austin made about meeting an investor, meet whoever in an elevator and giving the pitch. And I think the important thing to take into account is that each investor has different investment criteria they look for. So in many ways, the same way you would segment your customer market and say, these group of people, are an attractive group and would want to buy my product, and this other group are really not the optimal customers for me or not customers at all. I think it's the same with investors. And within the investor sphere, there are people who are willing to take risks on early stage companies that have just been around for a few months. There are people who would only invest in the companies they've been around much longer and are much larger. So people have different criteria. Some will invest certain geographies, different sectors. So as an entrepreneur looking to raise money, you should be attentive to who you're targeting to make sure that the investor you're targeting actually is the right investor based on your business, your sector, your criteria. Because if you make the pitch in the elevator, wherever, to an investor that has zero focus on your sector or your size of business, no matter how polished or smooth or aggressive that pitch is, it wouldn't work. And at the same time, you want to make sure that you're using, it's not easy to raise money. So you also want to make sure that as you're going out in that hard battle to raise money for your business, that you're spending your energy where it's most likely to be effective. So, and when you take that into account, and then you know what different investors' criteria are, it also makes it easier to pitch to that criteria. Because then as you're making your pitch, you can be attentive to those things that investor looks for once, and then ensure that that feeds into your pitch, whatever that pitch is. Now, in terms of specific things we're looking at now, so for our own criteria, for example, we only invest in companies that are in the food and agriculture segment and that have local supply chains in Nigeria. And we only invest in companies that have been around for 3-4 years and have above 300 million naira in revenue. So any company that is smaller than that, even if they're very exciting, the best we can do is stay close to you, work with you, and watch you grow. But the point at which we can invest is when you pass certain thresholds, both food and agriculture space. Now, has COVID changed how we invest? I would say not really, because we tend to be very long-term investors. When we invest, it's 5 to 7 years, and there's certain things strategically we're looking for. If anything, it's probably slowed down our ability to invest because we like to get to know the entrepreneurs, we like to visit the facilities, we like to really get a feel for the people that are driving the business. And right now we can't get on a plane and travel to Kano or to Benue or to wherever we travel to. And it's much harder to see facilities. So because of that, it slowed down because it's more difficult for us to engage. But at the same time, the types of companies we're looking at, criteria is still the same. Now, in terms of ultimately, what is important for us, I think it's the people. Because the people, and when I say what I mean, the people, it's not about how fancy do you speak English. It's about, do you know your business inside out? We're less interested in a nice, polished business plan, and more that if we have a conversation with you, can you speak about your business with depth, with all the different issues, challenges, opportunities, and can we sense that? And during times of challenges, are you able to show that you can pivot, adjust, and take steps to ensure your business survives and grows? So right now, I've been attentive to see for people within our pool that we would consider, how are they adjusting to these challenges? At the same time, we're trying to stay close to them to see where can we provide support. If there's anything in particular, I would say that we're even more attentive to is supply chains, because companies, it's very clear right now where global trade has slowed down. If you want to import products, even if you're willing to pay the price, many countries are restricting export of certain items. If you don't have a robust local supply chain, your costs go through the roof. So companies that have a very large portion, if not completely sourced internally, I think that's very interesting. And then there are two ways to look at it as well. If you can do value add before you export, and in an environment where currency is depreciating, that's attractive. If you're also selling your product into a domestic market where your consumer packaged food product is more competitively priced versus an imported equivalent product, that is also attractive. But with all that is said, ultimately it really comes down to the people. Do we see ourselves in marriage with them? Because in many ways, investing and providing equity and taking a stake in somebody's company is like entering into a marriage. Both sides is the entrepreneur and us. Are we happy with this partnership? And can we see this partnership lasting for a long time, regardless of the challenges, the problems that we will encounter? And if we see that and we're comfortable, and it's clear there's transparency in the engagement, it makes it much easier for us to engage and invest.
Thank you for those points, Mezu. I was typing frantically, being an SME ecosystem enabler and someone who runs a hub, and hearing all the time that funding is something SMEs need. It's always good to know what angel investors are looking for, what VCs are looking for, and of course what private equity companies are looking for. And this thing about people, you couldn't have said it better. It's very refreshing to hear that it's more about knowing your business inside out versus sophistication, for example, of a business plan. So that was great to hear. And then, just showing supply chain was something you mentioned, and I was on a call the other day, and we're talking about some of the key skills that will be in demand, for example, by organizations. And just looking at COVID-19, we agreed that supply chain was one of the things. If you have knowledge of that, that kind of exposure would be good. So thank you for those remarks. I'm going to go back to Austin and ask, in view of the funding challenges of small businesses, because we know there are challenges, even though there are funders, there are still challenges to raise money. It's an ongoing conversation. And in view of those challenges, what are the steps to be taken by a business owner to take advantage of digitization?
All right, so I'll answer about funding, but digitization, I think it's both the government and private companies, so PPP, that will bring about the platform for digitization. The private people, they've invested in the in phones. There are more phones in Nigeria than the population that can go onto the internet and browse. In terms of the private people, they've brought broadband to the shore. The amount of broadband at the shores of Lagos is much more than what we need. We've actually started exporting some. What is the problem? The problem is what we call the last mile, bringing the broadband to my home and to your home and to all the homes that need it, especially now. And Mezo just said his internet flickered. At the end of the day, I think we need the government to know that it's better to tax your fruits than to tax your seed. Heavily taxing the laying of fiber and calling it right-of-way tax such that people are not able to roll it out extensively, despite all the devices that can connect, I think is really cutting your nose to spite your face. Let the broadband go in and tax economic activity. The research I did is that if you tax right-of-way, you make 12%, and if you tax economic activity as a result of online trade, you make 78%. That's more than 4 times, more than 5 times. So let the broadband go in and tax at the end of the tree where all the fruits are. I'm talking about seeds and fruits. Let me answer your question on funding. The agile enterprises that are on this call, listen to me carefully. Your problem does not start and end with funding. We are always in a hurry to throw up our hands and say we didn't find funding. Be careful about raising money too early. And I'm speaking from a place of experience. That's also like eating your seed. You need to prove the concept. Develop a minimum viable product. A product which on the spectrum has gone through innovative idea and has gone through early adopters. Early adopters is where you have 15% usage of your product. So where you are now is what we call tipping point, and what you want is scale. And to scale, you need a lot of money to come in quickly to do a lot of things at the same time. That's why you need Mezo. Now, if you go and get Mezo when you have that entrepreneurial idea, you are selling too early and you are selling yourself short. Because at the end of the day, when CWG attracted funds in 2009, it was $10 million, but we were supposed to triple it. And I think it's the same across, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less. They're looking for 3 times in 5 years. So that 10 million, apart from the fact that I'll be paying a base dividend, whether I declare dividend or not, there's a base you pay. And then when you declare full dividend, you pay them the big one. There is also the fact that at the end of 5 years, I have to return not 10 million, $30 million. Yeah, that's what I have to return. I just did some sums to bring this home. So let's say at the time I had a brilliant idea with a minimum viable product. I had not even tested it amongst friends and family or beta testing. I just rushed to Mezo. Let's say I went to him in 2014 and I took $1 million. And Austin too went to a bank to take debt, also took debt of $1 million. For argument purposes, let's say $1 million then was 360 million naira. I'm just using 360. It was less in 2014, but let's say it's 360 at 20%. 20% means in 5 years, you've doubled the money, isn't it? 20% times 5. So in 5 years, the debt interest I would have paid is 360 million. I borrowed 365 years, I pay interest of 360. Now the other Austin borrowed $1 million. Remember, Mezo is not giving him a loan in Naira. It's in dollars and he wants his money back in dollars. And he wants 3 times. So Mezo will tell you, all right, you know, your projections and everything, I want $3 million in 5 years. Fast forward, today the money is due. $3 million is what you need to pay him. At 480 per dollar, you are going to pay him 1.35 billion. Whereas the other Austin over 5 years paid 360 you are going to pay times 3.75 times more expensive. You are going to pay Mezzo 1.35 billion. So whilst the other Austin that took debt is much better off, you are struggling. Why are you struggling? Because you are selling in Naira. The exchange rate is hitting you, affordability is hitting you. So the only way that I think you should go to Mezzo is when you've got to that point of exponential growth, where the cost is more or less covered, but is that growth that will yield everything that comes from there is a profit, then it makes sense. Then you can give Mezzo $3 million. Otherwise, be very careful. So ask yourself, what do I need? Agile entrepreneurs, what you need an idea which I call innovative idea. But I'm not talking about innovation only in terms of sophisticated technology, no. Anywhere you can match pent-up demand with idle assets is an innovation. So there were pent-up demands for need of transportation, and there were idle assets of people's car parked in their home and their offices. Somebody came and said, let me match them with Uber. He didn't have one car, but the platform brought the pent-up demand with the idle assets. Same with Airbnb and hotel rooms. Same with, let's say, Indomie. People couldn't buy a pack of noodles because it's expensive. And you need to buy tomato and onions and everything once you buy the noodles. And he came and says, I'm doing Indomie. In that pack is the stew already, that thing you put it there. If you are a bit afforded, you could buy an egg and fry with it, but without an egg, you can still eat it. Just hot water is what you need. And a small pack is affordable, or if you want the big one. So there's a pent-up demand of hunger, and this man is bringing a market creating opportunities of food, ready-made. So that's also innovation. People tend to think innovation is about technology and high-tech. No. Let me give you one example and go and work on it. Do you know that women carry 2 shoes every day they are going to the office? 1 pair of shoes for driving, flat, and 1 pair of shoes for looking tall in the office. I mean, why should they carry 2 shoes? If someone could come with an innovative idea of having a retractable heel, so when you're driving, you push in the heel, and when you get to the office, bring out the heel, then you have 1 shoe. But because it's not a men's problem, it's not being solved. If this was a main problem, it would be solved. So that's an innovative idea. So at the end of the day, be careful. Let me end on this note. A lot of agile businesses, I think where they don't know that they have weakness is in the skills. It's difficult to pay the kind of skills that you need and attract them to come to you because you are an agile business, you haven't made all that money. And that's where I think the tripod helps. So you are the hustler, you are the entrepreneur. Bring someone in as a partner, even as a junior partner, who is good with technology and operations. Bring someone in as a financial guru, give him some equity, and the 3 of you stabilize the business because a tripod is very stable. Then when you've taken it to a certain point where it needs to go through geometric growth, then go and talk to Mezzo. And then the staff. People say, well, we are small, we train the staff, and then the big companies come and take them. And I'll end on this. If you employ people for what they can get, so what is salary and benefits, when they find a better what, they are going to go to that better what. If you employ people for why am I joining Also Leadership Academy? We have a vision of shared prosperity, and our people believe in that. So there's a shared vision. And at the end of the day, they see themselves as very important in delivering that vision. The same way that the cleaner at the NASA Center told Kennedy, the cleaner, he says, we are working hard to put a man on the moon. He felt wedded to the vision. Although shouting, yes, I can, for Obama, how much was he paying them? How much was Mandela paying the freedom fighters? But they believed in the vision. So you need to be sure that the people that you bring in understand your vision and they believe in it and they see their part in it. I'm sorry I've gone on for long, but I'm so passionate about entrepreneurial issues. My deep apology.
No worries at all. Those were very insightful takeaways, the talk about innovation, matching pent-up demand with idle assets, and to begin to think about it that way, and then partnering with the right people so you can get that tripod effect for your business, which then helps you stabilize and grow. And then the point about staff, so is it throwing cash at employees to come and work for you, or really selling them your vision, which is when they, it's not about the money. And I think that's just the best advice ever, which is, don't hire based on money, because if it's money, the next person will always come and snag them. So thank you for those amazing insights, Austin. And I think now we've been talking a lot about, the demand side, the agile enterprises, the SMEs, what they need. But I want to look at the supply side now. So I'm going to ask Mezo, how are financiers adjusting their own norms to the new realities of doing business in this business SME world?
Sure. And I'll touch on that, but I think before I go directly to that specific question, I want to combine some of what Austin was saying earlier with this point, and tell two stories. The first one is separate from Sahel. So I'm not only an investor, I'm actually also an entrepreneur. I was involved in starting a food processing company 10 years ago, was involved day to day for the first 4 years before heading up to a management team, and also raised some money on that entity. And so the first story is around that, and his advice for entrepreneurs as you're seeking to start and raise money is we started extremely small in a rented location in Ojokoro with a 20,000 naira grinding machine. And just to give context, most people feel if they're going to go into business, they must start big. And we started very, very small, very small. I was employee number one, few employees, rented location, a converted house. And the objective for us was, let us prove concept over the next 2 years, have proper records and governance in place. So in 2 years' time, we can then try and raise money from friends, family, third parties to then expand. And the first real equipment, and really is not even the right word, we bought, was after we first got our big first initial customer orders from a large fast food restaurant who asked our processing capacity. And I gave some back of the envelope answer. But the summary is we started small. We had good record keeping in place, financial records, good transparency. So in 2 years' time, when we went to now raise money from friends and family, not from institutional investors. And the reason that friends and family is because friends and family will pay you a better valuation than institutional investors, and we give you benefit of the doubt. So from that friends and family round, we then were able to buy a factory, a small factory, and then move into a location in Songota, where the company is currently located, and then grew further. But throughout this entire time of growing, it's very focused on how can we prove to investors, have the record keeping, transparency, etc., to grow, and then what are other sources of capital that's out there. It's not just bank loans, it's not just equity investors. There's also grant funding available that you can tap in either through technical assistance, so you can get technical assistance for people to help you do market research. There's a lot of other options out there besides private equity that is worth considering. Because as Austin said, by the time you get to institutional investor, the negotiations, the terms, the partnerships will be very aggressive. They want to see certain structures in place, and you want to make sure that you've built to the point where you're going to capture enough value for yourself. At the same time, there's a platform for you and the investor to grow together. So there's a lot that needs to be done before you start thinking about that outside investor. And you can grow small and start small and grow, and there's a lot of opportunity to do that and still get scale. The second story I want to tell is about finding the right partner. And I see online that somebody asked a question about how do you choose the right business partner? And it's a story about I won't mention names, but it's a company that was around for 20 years. Founded entrepreneur, built a company from scratch, grew to roughly one. Had a friend acquaintance who worked at a multinational, well-connected, and he felt, and who wanted to invest in his business. And because of the man's name, reputation, just effectively big man with money, the man invested and took maybe a 25% stake in the business, equity investment. And then 2 years later, the business went through some challenges and it had a hard time paying dividends, paying back loans. And this individual came and paid me my money back.
I think we may have lost him again.
Yes, we need to.
Yeah.
So is the connection back?
And I think it's come back. I'm mindful of the time because we have 15 minutes. It's come back. Can you hear me now? Oh.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
So I'm not sure how much lost about. Try and be quick. The summary is that he thought he went to somebody willing to give money when times were difficult. That relationship became combustible and effectively had the company taken from him. And so just to highlight that it's not every money that you take. And the same way that you pick a life partner, a marriage partner, husband, wife, you need to pay very close attention to who exactly is this investor. Am I comfortable? And it's go both ways. So it's a mutual bilateral engagement. Do I trust this person? Forget the money. Will this person add value to my business? Do they have a network, relationships, insights, knowledge of sector that would add to what I'm trying to do to help me build this business? And I think that is very, very important. And so I would even take, and this is speaking as an entrepreneur, I would take a lower valuation from a trusted partner that I believe would help me grow the business versus a higher valuation from somebody who I'm really not sure if things get tough, how that dynamic would work. So it's very important, just to be very attentive to that. Now, going specific to the question, from what I recall, is have investors.
I think we've lost him again. Okay, let's see. Give him maybe another minute or so. If not, we'll move into questions from the audience. There's quite a few questions. Some of them have been answered live, which is good, but then we'll be able to take some from the Q&A box.
Yes, sorry, it looks like the connection on my side.
Yeah, no worries at all. There's quite a few questions, so maybe we can go into the questions now, and I will see how we can direct a few to Austin until Meso's internet comes back up properly. If that's okay.
Sure, I'm not sure if it's back up now or not.
Okay, well, we can hear you now. Did you want to wrap up what you were saying? Sorry about that.
Yeah, so I'm not sure where I got cut off, but I think I'll just summarize in that it's very important to, the same way you choose a spouse is the same way you choose an investor. Yeah. And even if the investor is not paying premium valuation as somebody else is, if you believe that person would add value to help you grow your business, that's in many ways is very beneficial. And the way I personally think about it is when problems come, because problems will always come in business as in life, is this a partner that you would weather the storm well with you during that crisis, will be supportive during that crisis, will help you think through how, or is able to help you think through how to resolve problems? And if the answer is yes, then that's a good partner. And I would prioritize that over valuation. At the same time, I would also, as a business owner, entrepreneur, I would also delay the point at which you bring in third-party investors until it's very clear in your mind the value that they would add to help you expand your business exponentially over and beyond the money. So over and beyond the money, what can they bring to the table that will help you grow your business faster, regardless of the money? And so I'll summarize there, but I think those are really the key points.
Thank you for that, Mezo. I think the few key points, there was a running theme, which was more than money. It reminds me of a book titled More Than Money. Finding the right partner is like a marriage, it's more than money. Valuation, again, more than money. And then the point about not going in with a third party too soon. Again, it's not always about the money. And like you said, not every money is good money based on the story you share. So thank you for those insights. We'll move into the questions now. There's quite a few from in the Q&A box. Chinedu Ozo says, most SMEs lack the organizational structure and competencies required to take their business to the next level. Added to this is the lack of succession planning initiatives that would guarantee the sustainability of their businesses. Unless these issues are addressed, most SMEs will not outlive the first generation promoters. Very true. We would appreciate insights from the panelists on how to overcome these hurdles. I think I will direct that question to Austin, if that's okay.
Yeah. So I wrote something on succession and going beyond the first generation. And I think the title of it, if you could Google it on YouTube, is called The Founder's Trap. Founder as in founder and trap as in trap, the founder's trap. In my view, based on my experience, when a company starts, the founder is all-knowing and is all-powerful. He is the one that has a blueprint. So on the order of the scale of the graph, he's there. As time goes on, he gives away part of his power, and what picks up that is governance. So there is a code of governance which the founder hands over power to, so that even he is bound by governance. He doesn't take any amounts arbitrarily. He puts himself on his salary and allowances and is declared. It may be early for a board. You can have an advisory board, because sometimes you need someone to hold your shirt as an entrepreneur. I know us. We run very fast. We see everything as bright. We need someone to be a soundboard. So you can have an advisory board. An advisory board advice, you can take it or leave it. Whereas a full board, you are responsible to that board. So start with an advisory board with a mind to eventually get a full board. It comes to a point of inflection where they've reached an equilibrium. There is sufficient governance. There is enough knowledge from the founder still adding value. But over time, there is a need for fresh ideas. And that over time could be 15 years, could be 25 years, could be, I don't know how many years. But if the founder reaches a point where there is what we call diminishing returns, and he doesn't bring in succession quickly, he should have started thinking about succession 2 or 3 years before, if not more. But now you've hit that point. What you find is that there is a deep crash of value, almost to zero. And when the founder bows out, there's actually nothing left. But the most important thing is at the point of inflection, the founder should start thinking about life beyond the business. What are my other passions? So I left CWG, I retired in 2015, but I knew what I was going to do. I knew very clearly that I was going to do leadership impact. So I wasn't scared at all. People are not scared that they will be broke, because entrepreneurship, if it works, is very rewarding. You become very rich. So broke is not the issue. What many people fear is the lack of relevance. Some other people fear that if I don't keep it in the family, then we'll lose it. I would suggest, if there's nobody in the family ready or passionate enough, let the family be bequeathed with the shares and let them benefit from dividend. But get people that are passionate and knowledgeable to run it as a succession, so that there will still be value in it. JP Morgan is somebody's name. And look at it. We don't even know who JP Morgan is. We just know it as a name. And at the end of the day, that's where we need to get to. But to get there, we need to be very clear about the value that you will get from second generation successful, third generation successful. That's what value is. In other words, the value of Mercedes today is bigger, much bigger than the value of Mercedes in the first initial founders era. So let's not shortchange ourselves. Dreams, if dreams are free, don't shortchange yourself. Dream big and reach for the stars. With perseverance, you'll touch the sky. Don't shortchange yourself.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to move on to the next question. We'll try and take about 3 more questions. There's a question on agriculture that says, excuse me, I'm just trying to find it. Okay, so I'll direct that at Mezo. It says, for a startup who would like to venture into the agricultural business in Nigeria and Africa at large, how can they run a market survey? So maybe just give some tips as to how an SME can begin to think about, surveying their potential market or what they can use to get that done.
I'll tell you what I did when I started Ace Foods, because I think that's probably the most practical versus saying engage a consultant, is that we knew we wanted to process different spicy seasonings, but where do we source it from, at what price, and who do we sell it to at what price, and how big is this market? And we had ideas, but we didn't know. So I think you have to go into the field yourself. So I literally, my suits from prior life were in the closet. I spent a large amount of time in mile 12, sitting with different individuals there, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour, just chatting about the market and their business, and I might buy small volumes. But and the reality is they weren't telling me anything the first day, the second day, but the more you engage in conversation, the more they say, well, I get this from Kaduna. Then the next thing was I had lots of trips to I can tell you towns in Kaduna and Kano that I went to, met with farmer cooperatives, different groups, just understanding pricing dynamics, where do you get this from, and do the same with on the customer side. So you have to be out in the field. You can't be in your house trying to gather data on Google. It would not work. You wouldn't get very good data. You have to be out in the field. So depending on what your sector is, plan for several weeks, several months of data gathering, yourself traveling to get the data. The second thing that we did is when we had some rough indication of where pricing was, where we could get products from, I think it was at that point that we actually said, okay, let us get a consultant to help us, or that we could provide. And we actually, at that time, in the very beginning, we were able to get some technical assistance to engage a consultant who then was able to go into the field in areas where we didn't go and traveled around for a period of 3 months, and then came back with data. And we were very clear what data we wanted. So it wasn't a high level, tell us what's happening in the market. It was very specific. It was which villages and towns can we get ginger from? Can we get chili from? Who are the farmer cooperatives? What are their phone numbers? What are their contacts? What are their farming season? And that data, when we got it, we went out to then validate that data. So it was an iterative process, but the summary is we had to be out in the field. So depending on what you're thinking of doing, it is to realize that, and I don't know so the agriculture is quite broad, everything from oil palm to cashew to seasonings to, it's very broad. So depending on what it is, you have to figure out which town, which city, how do you get primary data, and then how do you support that with third parties. So lots of feet in the field getting data, especially if you're going to put your own money at risk, of money of friends and family. You need to make sure you have firsthand knowledge of the issues versus somebody telling you that they actually went and this is what it is without having firsthand knowledge. So it's important to make sure you have that firsthand knowledge, and then to start small, because when you start small, you can actually test. So if you start big and you make a mistake, you have a huge amount of investment to equipment you don't need, to a location that's the wrong location, that would not work. But starting small, it gives you an ability, and to use Austin's words earlier, you're more agile to then pivot, change to a different product if you now realize that the opportunity is elsewhere. So starting small, and then as you understand the sector better, then building up.
Okay, thank you very much, Mezo, for that. Start small, do your research. Sometimes you have to go into the market. I'll move into the next 2 questions. We have 5 minutes left, and we have 2 questions, and I'm going to try and see how we can answer that and wrap up. Okay, so Mrs. Bimbola Wright says, COVID has catalyzed very significant changes in customer behaviors, and this will continue. What approach can be applied to understanding the emerging customer and reinstate a positive experience? So I'm going to direct that at Austin.
Ms. Wright, I don't think that you will wait for that revelation. And I'll tell you what I feel that those that are going to leverage to be the industry leaders of tomorrow will be doing. The entrepreneurial instinct in you, we've talked about matching demand and idle assets and so on, but the entrepreneur is a guy that sees beyond everybody else, sees before everybody else, and sees more than everybody else. He sees things that are not yet obvious. Now, by the time it's obvious, there is no innovative idea. You are just in the mud, swimming in the sea sand. So I would say there are people, three types of people: those that make things happen, those that watch things happen, and those that wonder what happened. They never get it. If you want to be an entrepreneur, be sure that you're the kind of person that can make things happen. So the pandemic has happened. Do not wait. Make things happen from the scenario of the pandemic. Look at game-changing ideas, and they may not be complex, sometimes simple. But you know your passion areas. Some people were making fashion clothes, and they started now making PPEs. They made things happen. Otherwise, would have had to import PPEs. So because I know that the time is short, I can take it offline with Ms. Wright. But at the end of the day, you make things happen. Don't wait for things to come and meet you.
Thank you. And our final question is from Olufemilayo Oduwaye. It's a great question, actually. Which is more important to SMEs now, saving the business or saving the staff? By business, I presume they mean, of course, customers. Customers. So I'll ask Mesville, and then I'll ask Austin, and then we can close there. Okay.
You know, when you fly, or when we used to fly, and the attendants are making the announcement, they'll say, put on your oxygen mask first before that of your child. So in order to save your staff, you need to save your business, which means many hard decisions have to be made. But there are different guidelines depending on the severity of the issue you can take. So I think generally, you want to make sure that if you have good staff or staff that know your business and you trust, what can you do even in a crisis? So I've seen companies do a range of different things in that situation. So on the one hand, I've seen one company decide that everybody would take a pay cut, including the leadership, so that they would not need to lay off certain people. So so some people might decide, I'll take 70% of my salary to have a job, that all of us have a job, versus some people keep 100%, some have zero, is one approach. Other people would say that, well, I can't afford to do that. It's not going to work given my context. So it's to say, okay, I'll do a furlough. So a furlough is saying the staff would have an unpaid leave of absence for 1 month or 2 months. But after that, they're going to come back and there'll be a job, which is very different from you're sacked, you're fired, you're relieved, and it's not clear whether or not you will come back and what that means. And each company's situation is different. But I think to the question is, you have to save your business first if you're going to save jobs, ultimately. But then you have to then figure out, depending on how severe a situation is, what are the options you can take to ensure that the company survives and you retain the people you need to ensure that your business has growth further down the road.
Thank you. And so Austin will try and do this in 1 minute, so I can hand over to Anne and we can get us out of here in less than 2 minutes.
Yeah, there are two things. The first is the owner of the business. I mean, if you are careful, you see that there's been some efficiency and cost savings from what has happened in pandemic. People are not spending so much transport money. If your transport money is 30%, that's a saving, of your salary. So, and then of course, people don't need so much real estate, which we can also go into funding, but it has to be when the real estate contract comes to an end. I would say, let's come to an agreement. We are not taking transport. Transport is 30%. So let's take a 30% depreciation, but we'll put it on bringing business. Everybody wants business. So we'll break our remuneration into fixed and variable. Fixed 70%. But the 30% is on the back of a business that has come in. Then, it's like a bonus or commission. Then the staff are all more geared towards game-changing and out-of-the-box thinking that can bring the business. At the end of the day, it's not whether the staff is there or not. It's whether we're generating more than we are paying. And whenever we're generating more than we're paying, there's no need to ask anybody to go. But there has to be that motivation. And that motivation is tie something to the bringing of the bacon. My last words. There are 3 W's that I would like you to keep in mind, agile entrepreneurs. 1 is way power. The first W. Learn everything about what you're doing. Mezo said he was sitting in mile 12 and so on. That's way power. Don't do armchair learning. 2, willpower. That's the second W. Where everybody says give up. Go that extra mile. Maybe the light is at the end of that tunnel. And the last W is weight power. That speaks to patience. If you plant corn, you harvest in 3 months, but you harvest only once. If you plant cocoa, it's going to take 5 years, but it will feed you and your generations. Know what you're planting. And that is all that I can tell you, but it will help you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the lasting words.
So if you don't mind, just quickly 10 seconds, because I just want to make sure that an earlier comment wasn't taken out of context, is on salary reductions. There are legal guidelines on what you can do, what you can't do. So just to comment that as you're looking to make decisions, be attentive to the labor laws, legal guidelines. There's some things you need the consent of staff to do, and you can't do arbitrarily. So I just wanted to make sure I provide that clarity on that particular comment. But I think in terms of closing remarks, I think Austin has, I'll stand on his closing remarks. Even also, we're short of time.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. And I think at this point, we're 3 minutes over. I'll just hand over to Anne and say thank you, everyone. And thank you to our awesome panelists for this wonderful session. So over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much, Aramide. That was indeed a very brilliant session, brilliant panelists. Before we extend our deep gratitude to the 3 of you for this wonderful session we just had, I'd just like to quickly mention that we will be holding our next webinar, the 6th webinar series on Thursday next week, the 28th of May, on financial management and the fact that the rainy day is upon us. So we do hope that you all join us on that day. We also have some upcoming trainings, e-trainings in June. We hope that you will be able to participate. The details are currently on our website and on all our social media platforms. We have some participants, audience watching the session on YouTube. We hope that you all found it very useful. I must deeply thank and extend our gratitude to Aramide. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. You brought light to the discussion. And to our panelists, Mr. Okere, I continue to be impressed. Every time I meet you or listen to you, I'm totally blown away. I thank you deeply for your time, for sharing from your wealth of knowledge and experience. And that's something that you brought very clearly to the table. To Mezu, this is the first time I'm listening to you speak, and I'm totally blown away. I thank you for your time, for agreeing to join this session at such short notice. I cannot thank you enough. Thank you for those very personal and practical tips that you shared. The wealth of experience that you have also was very clear. You brought that to the table. Thank you so much. I would like to say that the insights that you both have shared and some of the comments that Aramide brought to the table are details and insights that are useful not only to SMEs and startups, I must say. I dare say those insights are very useful to large companies as well, global, local companies, wherever they be. The insights are very useful to any company at whatever stage of transition they are in. The COVID-19 has not impacted just the SMEs, that's impacted every industry, every sector in Nigeria. We hope that it will come to an end soon, but until it does, we hope that people will implement some of the insights you've shared. Thank you very much. And I must not leave our audience. Thank you to our distinguished audience for your time. We hope that you'll join us next week. We thank you. And with that, I'd like to say a big thank you from all of us at DCSL. Have a wonderful evening and continue to stay safe. Thank you very much and bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.